It was a chilly Saturday morning in early November of 2019 when I stumbled upon the yard sale that forever changed my perception of innocence. Living in the quiet suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina, I had grown accustomed to weekend sales scattered across the quaint neighborhoods. Yard sales always fascinated me. The idea of someone's forgotten treasures becoming someone else's cherished find had a certain charm that drew me in. That morning felt no different as I pulled up to an old brick home with boxes spilling onto the sidewalk. The yard was filled with curious neighbors rummaging through heaps of vintage goods, rusted trinkets and faded furniture. But amidst all the clutter, one thing captured my attention immediately. Sitting alone on a weathered wooden rocking chair was a porcelain doll, unlike anything I'd seen before. She wore a faded emerald dress, her auburn curls cascading perfectly around her delicate shoulders. Yet despite her beauty, something about her eyes felt deeply unsettling. They weren't the typical glassy, vacant stare. These eyes felt real, piercing, almost alive. Intrigued, yet slightly disturbed, I approached the elderly woman running the sale and asked about the doll. She hesitated briefly, her gaze shifting uneasily before telling me it had belonged to her late mother, who had spent her life creating handmade dolls. Her voice trembled slightly as she mentioned that her mother had been particularly attached to this one, calling it her masterpiece. Despite her visible discomfort, she seemed eager to part ways with it, practically pushing it into my hands after I handed over a few crumpled bills. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. Glancing occasionally at the doll sitting in the passenger seat, its realistic eyes seemed to meet mine through peripheral vision. It felt absurd, but a strange paranoia crept into my thoughts, making me question my own senses. Once home, I placed the doll on a bookshelf in my bedroom, hoping its unsettling presence would diminish with familiarity. Yet, as the days passed, my discomfort only intensified. I found myself increasingly disturbed by the feeling of being watched. Every night I'd toss restlessly, waking frequently with a creeping sensation of eyes lingering upon me in the darkness. Soon other strange occurrences began. Small objects vanished from my room only to reappear in places I was certain I'd never left them. Lights flickered unpredictably, and subtle rustling sounds echoed softly from corners where nothing stirred. The atmosphere of my home grew increasingly oppressive, as though a silent presence had permanently invaded my space. My sleep became plagued by unsettling dreams of a dimly lit room filled with half-assembled dolls, their lifeless porcelain limbs scattered carelessly about. In these dreams, I often saw the doll maker herself, a shadowy figure, hunched meticulously over her work, whispering unintelligible words as she attached tiny eyes into sockets that bled darkness. I would awake, gasping, my heart pounding frantically in my chest. Unable to bear the mounting dread any longer, I decided to research the doll maker. After hours of searching local historical records and newspaper archives, I discovered a horrifying truth. The elderly woman at the yard sale hadn't been entirely truthful. Her mother hadn't simply been a doll maker, she had been accused of crimes that the community preferred to forget. Back in the late 1940s, several children had mysteriously vanished from the Asheville area, never to be found. While authorities had no concrete evidence linking her to the disappearances, suspicion always hovered around her isolated home. Rumors circulated that the doll maker's creations were somehow connected to the missing children. Whisperings that she had infused pieces of the vanished souls into each carefully crafted porcelain figure. The chills racing down my spine as I read these details were unlike anything I'd experienced before. I rushed to my bedroom, feeling an urgent need to rid myself of the eerie doll. My breath caught sharply as I noticed that the bookshelf was empty. Panic surged through me. The doll had vanished. Heart racing, I frantically tore apart my apartment, desperate to locate it, but it was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to give up, a faint rustling sound drew my attention toward my bedroom closet. I approached slowly, my fingers trembling as I turned the handle and swung the door open. Inside, neatly seated atop a pile of clothes, the doll stared directly at me, her glassy eyes reflecting the dim bedroom light. Only now did I notice something different. The doll's delicate porcelain lips, once painted in a neutral expression, were twisted subtly into a faint, chilling smile. The realization sent a wave of nausea through my body. Before I could react, I heard my phone vibrating insistently on my nightstand. A text message from an unknown number appeared, containing a single line that froze my blood completely. "You shouldn't have disturbed her." It was late August of 2020 when I found myself wandering through a sleepy neighborhood in suburban Oregon, searching aimlessly for yard sales to pass a lazy Sunday afternoon. The day was warm and humid, with a thin haze of cloud drifting across the sun, giving everything around me a slightly muted, surreal quality. Most yard sales that day had been disappointing, filled with nothing but worn clothing and broken electronics, until I reached an old ranch-style house hidden away at the end of the Blackwood Drive. Its paint was peeling, the yard overgrown, and a scattering of household items littered the driveway, seemingly hastily set out for sale. There wasn't another soul around, yet the handwritten sign assured me everything had to go. Curiosity piqued. I ventured further in. Among the piles of old kitchenware and dusty board games, one object immediately stood out. A large antique mirror with an ornate silver frame propped carelessly against the garage door. Something about the mirror was captivating yet unsettling. I stepped closer, gazing into the slightly tarnished glass, noticing its warped reflection seemed oddly distorted, my face appearing elongated, eyes deeper, darker, somehow not entirely my own. Before I could look away, the owner appeared suddenly at my side, startling me. He was an older gentleman with hollow cheeks, dark circles under his eyes, his appearance gaunt as if life had been slowly drained from him. Without prompting, he told me the mirror was nearly a century old, passed down through generations. His voice was oddly detached, eyes avoiding mine as he muttered that it held memories best forgotten. Despite his cryptic warning, I felt strangely drawn to it. Handing over the money quickly, I carefully loaded the mirror into the back seat of my car and drove home, glancing occasionally into my rearview mirror where it lay covered with a blanket. From the moment I set it up in my living room, the mirror unsettled me. In daylight it seemed ordinary enough, but at night the air around it felt heavy, almost charged. The reflection always appeared distorted at its edges, twisting subtly as though it wasn't merely reflecting my room but another place entirely. Soon strange dreams plagued my nights. In these dreams I was standing before the mirror in darkness, unable to look away. My reflection stared back at me, moving independently, always smiling faintly, always beckoning me closer. Each night the dreams grew increasingly vivid, and each morning I awoke feeling weaker, drained of energy, as if the mirror was gradually taking something precious from me. My waking hours soon became overshadowed by paranoia. I began seeing movements at the corner of my vision, fleeting shadows reflected in the mirror's surface, yet when I turned, nothing was ever there. Friends began to remark how tired and pale I looked, but I couldn't explain what was happening. Who would believe such madness anyway? Determined to shake my irrational fears, I tried moving the mirror into a spare room out of sight, hoping the oppressive presence would fade. Instead, things worsened. One night I awoke suddenly, gasping for air, unable to move, as if paralyzed. My eyes strained in the dimness, fixated on the open door of the spare room directly across from my bedroom. From within that darkened room, illuminated by pale moonlight, I saw the mirror clearly visible, and standing there in front of it, barely distinguishable from shadows, was a silhouette. Its form shifted subtly, almost fluid, mimicking the same elongated, distorted features I'd noticed in my first reflection at the yard sale. My heart thundered painfully in my chest, desperation filling my body as I tried to scream, yet no sound came. Then slowly the figure turned toward me, its movements jerky, unnatural. Although its face was obscured by darkness, I could feel its gaze piercing deeply into mine, invasive and cold. I fought to move, fought against the invisible force that held me trapped, my vision fading slowly until darkness swallowed me whole. I awoke the next morning on my bedroom floor, disoriented, chilled to the bone. Determined to destroy whatever curse the mirror held, I scrambled into the spare room, only to find it empty. The mirror had vanished entirely. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication anyone had entered or left my home. Frantically, I searched every corner, desperate to confirm I hadn't imagined it all. But the mirror was gone, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and the lingering chill of dread. Weeks passed without incident. Gradually, life returned to some semblance of normalcy, and I tried to convince myself it had all been some stress-induced hallucination. Then, one evening, as I walked home from work, my eyes caught sight of something chillingly familiar. Across the street, propped against the mailbox of an old Victorian house with a sign announcing an estate sale, was that unmistakable, ornate silver frame, the mirror waiting patiently for its next unsuspecting victim. Even from that distance, I felt its pull, felt its silent hunger reaching out toward me, drawing me closer once more. Just as I forced myself to turn away, I noticed something else that froze the blood in my veins. The figure reflected in the mirror was not the empty street around it, but unmistakably, terrifyingly me, smiling and beckoning from within the glass. It was an unusually brisk Sunday morning in late September of 2021 when I stumbled upon an unassuming yard sale nestled in the sleepy suburbs just outside of Columbus, Ohio. My weekly habit of browsing through neighborhood sales had become a comforting routine, a distraction from life's stresses. I didn't expect much that day, as most of the tables I'd passed were stacked with ordinary household items, worn toys, and second-hand clothing. But as I approached the final house on Magnolia Lane, an odd sensation prickled at the base of my neck, a feeling I should have recognized as a warning. The yard itself was filled with miscellaneous trinkets, antiques, and faded collectibles, but one particular item immediately captured my attention. A delicate antique music box sitting alone on a chipped white garden table. Intrigued, I carefully lifted its lid. A gentle, haunting melody drifted softly through the air, weaving an eerie calm that drew me in deeper. The elderly woman overseeing the sale glanced up sharply when she heard the music, her expression shifting subtly from welcoming to uneasy. As she approached, her voice was tinged with a faint tremor as she told me the music box had belonged to her sister, who had mysteriously disappeared many decades ago. Something about the sadness in her eyes, the restrained fear in her voice made me hesitate, but against my better judgment, I felt compelled to buy it. I handed over a few bills and walked away, clutching the music box tightly, unaware of the darkness I'd just invited into my life. At home, I placed it carefully on the mantel above my fireplace. Its fragile porcelain exterior glistened softly in the fading daylight, and though it seemed innocent enough, the melody lingered in my ears long after the music had stopped. That first night, sleep evaded me, replaced by unsettling dreams filled with indistinct whispers and shadows that lurked just beyond my vision. When I awoke the following morning, my head was heavy, my body strangely exhausted, as though something had drained the energy from me overnight. Over the next few days, a feeling of deep unease settled permanently within my home. I noticed that the music box seemed to play on its own, faintly at first, just a few quiet notes drifting from the mantel at odd times. Soon, however, the melody grew louder and more persistent, echoing hauntingly down the empty hallways, even when its lid was firmly shut. At night, the music invaded my dreams, slowly transforming them into chilling nightmares. I found myself wandering through unfamiliar corridors in my sleep, desperately searching for something I couldn't remember losing, while always feeling a sinister presence trailing behind, just out of sight. Each morning I'd wake more drained than before, shadows beneath my eyes growing darker, my reflection appearing increasingly gaunt. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in my home thickened with dread. Objects began to move on their own, pictures knocked askew, furniture subtly shifted from their places. A sense of being watched settled over me, growing more intense each passing day, until paranoia gripped my every waking hour. I knew then that the music box was responsible, but something deep within me was terrified of confronting it directly. Desperate for answers, I began researching the music box's history, discovering unsettling stories about Magnolia Lane and its grim past. Decades earlier, the neighborhood had been rocked by a series of unexplained disappearances, young women who vanished without a trace. Rumors swirled, whispered cautiously between neighbors, suggesting something sinister linked to an item each victim had acquired, a delicate porcelain music box, identical to the one sitting on my mantel. Heart pounding, I raced home, intent on destroying the cursed object immediately. But as I entered my living room, my breath caught sharply in my throat. The music box had disappeared from the mantel. Panicked, I searched my house frantically, tearing apart every room, overturning furniture, but the music box was gone. Exhausted and defeated, I collapsed onto my bed, trying to convince myself it was finally over, that perhaps I had imagined the entire ordeal. But as darkness settled over the house, a gentle melody began to drift slowly up from beneath me, soft, haunting, and unmistakably familiar. With dread twisting painfully inside me, I realized the music was coming from somewhere beneath the floorboards of my bedroom. Hands trembling uncontrollably, I pried open the loose boards, revealing a hidden crawl space beneath the house. Taking a flashlight, I descended hesitantly, the melody growing louder, echoing disturbingly in the confined darkness. As I moved deeper inside, my beam of light illuminated a small pile of earth recently disturbed beneath the very center of my home. Driven by morbid curiosity, I began digging frantically with my bare hands, each handful of dirt sending chills coursing through me. Moments later, my fingers scraped against something cold and hard. Heart racing, I brushed the dirt away, revealing the porcelain music box buried beneath my floor, playing its haunting melody without pause. But something else was uncovered beside it, tattered pieces of faded fabric and human remains, partially decayed, wrapped carefully around the music box as though lovingly embraced. Before I could react, the music abruptly stopped, plunging the crawl space into deafening silence. A cold, whispering breath brushed across the back of my neck, and the gentle laughter of a woman's voice murmured softly behind me, "Now you're mine." If you've enjoyed these chilling yard sale stories, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with more spine-tingling true tales. Remember, sometimes the most innocent objects hold the darkest secrets. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next haunting video.